Hello everyone, this is your guy Rajat. So for the last couple of months, I have been working with React quite a lot. So I have deployed two apps in production. One is Kivia, the other one is polychat.com, right? So in this course, I'm going to teach you basics of React. The intent of producing such a course is that because when I started learning React around 7 months ago, I was searching for a course which can give me a good head start as far as theory is concerned, and also it should give me a nice hands-on so that I can go out there and create practical and real-world applications using React. So I did find some courses and I distilled all of that knowledge in this one particular course. So I hope that this kind of course will be beneficial to those persons who are actually looking into getting into React and creating some real world applications and launch these applications for people to use. In this course, I'm going to teach you a little bit of theory so that you at least know like what is happening under the hood. Then we will go right into the practicals and the hands-on. So in that thing, I will teach you like how to write React components, how to put that components together, and how to create a full-fledged React application. So let's get started. So what is React? React is a JavaScript library which you use to build user interfaces. Now you can build all sorts of applications like single page applications or applications like chat, messengers and all, right? So you can use React to build that sort of interfaces, right? So in this course, the way I have structured this course is I'm going to teach you basics of React. Now this particular course won't be concentrated too much on building applications for web or building applications for mobile. I just want to teach you guys the basics of React so that if you want to build mobile applications using React Native, you can head straight to a React Native video and you will be having all of the knowledge of React, so that you can just take all of those React knowledge and plug it into React Native course and you can be on your way on building mobile application. In case you want to develop applications for web, then you can go to that particular route. I'm not going to teach you in this code how to set up npm and all, or how to set up webpack and build web applications. We will be using an online code editor, codepen.io, so that you don't have to install anything in order to learn the basics of React. So this course will teach you basics of React, like what are states and props and components, right? So after you have that particular knowledge, you can choose whatever route you want to go to. Okay, so in React, everything is a component, right? So if you have a big application, so that application is comprised of components, right? So there are two type of components in React. First one is a functional component and it has this particular property props, right? So every component in React has this particular property props. Now this prop is an object which can have other properties as well, right? So, and the other type of component is the class component. So in addition to the props property, this class component can also has some internal state. Now, in case you are wondering what is the difference between these two, now suppose most of you have seen this particular switch. You must be having that sort of switch on iPhone and iOS like Android interfaces, right? And so you can toggle that switch, and on toggling it goes from on to off or from off to on, right? So that is a internal property of that particular component, right? So this particular state represents that particular toggling, okay, as far as that particular toggle button is concerned. So this class component can have that sort of internal properties in addition to these props, and these props are passed to these particular components from the container component, right? So let's look in more detail what I'm talking about. So let's suppose whenever you try to compute some mathematical expression on Google, you get to see this sort of calculator on Google, right? So if we talk about building this sort of calculator in React, since we already know now that everything is a component in React, so the container of this calculator is the master component. Now this is just a term I have invented right now. This is a component. This particular display window is a component. This, all of these keys are individual components as well. Now it depends on the builder of the application what sorts of abstraction he actually wants from his application and what sort of abstraction he is compatible with, right? So um, one builder can build this entire application as a one component. Builder 2 can build this application as a collection of one container component. These two are individual component, right? The third builder can build it like this is one component, this one is other component, all of these keys are separate component, and then this collection can be the container component for all of these keys. So it solely depends on how comfortable the programmer is with the kind of abstraction he's building. Okay, so how do you exactly write a React component? So you use this particular sort of syntax which is JavaScript extended to build or to write React component. So before diving into this JSX thing, let's head over to CodePen and let's write our first component, CodePen.io. Since we have already talked that we are not going to install anything, and okay, so in this particular tutorial we are going to build the application for web, but it is not dependent on the web. You can use these concepts in React Native as well. So we are going to create a div with id equals to root. Okay, all right, so this is the container of our React application. Okay, and we are going to do some settings. So we will go to JavaScript and we will opt in for Babel processor, because we are going to use some ES6 syntax, so Babel can easily transpile that syntax for us. And then we are going to quickly add React and React DOM, because we are going to use React in web browser. So React DOM component will be the glue between React and the browser. Okay, so we have created this empty div. Okay, so now we are going to write a React component. So we have already talked about functional components, right? So let's write our first functional component. So we are going to write a function and let it be hello, and let's pass some props to it as we have talked about. Okay, return div and let it be props dot name and div. Okay, so this is our first component which is functional. Okay, now let's use it. React DOM dot render hello document get element by id root. So what this line is doing is that it is replacing this particular root div with this particular React component. Now what did React component is outputting? It is outputting this particular component, or you can say this particular DOM tree. And now we are going to pass a props, okay, because we have requested this particular name. So the name would be Rajat, okay. And as you can see that we have got Rajat in this particular window, right? So that is the smallest component you can write in React, right? So you must be wondering about this particular syntax. This is JSX, as we have talked about JSX as JavaScript extended notation. Now let's look more into what JSX is. So you use the combination of JavaScript and HTML, or it is not actually HTML, but it is more like XML mixed with JavaScript. So you get full power of JavaScript inside these XML tags. So you write this sort of content in React. Now this is not HTML, but this is JSX. Now when React transpiles your React code, right? So it transforms this sort of syntax to React.createElement p null and high. Null being the props, right? And high being the children. So you can look more about this create element and the properties you pass to this create element in React's own documentation, right? So after transpilation, you get this sort of create elements call in your code. Now, these calls are used to build a tree, which is a representation of your application at one particular moment. So React has this particular notion that you should care about how your application looks at one particular instance in time, right? So after transpilation, this is what is actually stored in the tree which React's built, right? So React built this sort of tree which represent what kind of UI it should present to the user. Now in case of React Native, it uses iOS or Android's native APIs to construct or to output or to show relevant controls to the user, and in case of browsers it actually uses this concept known as virtual DOM, which represent, or you can say, which mimics the browser DOM. Now if you don't understand what browser DOM is document object model, and if you write some sort of HTML, that HTML renders as a DOM, right? So all of that particular HTML is a particular tree and which contains elements, right? So browser represent your HTML document as a DOM, right? So this React, if in context of web, builds virtual DOM, and that virtual DOM mimics what sort of DOM it should actually present to the user in browser. Now virtual DOM actually helps React in calculating efficiently like what components or what particular DOM node it should actually change, right? So and there is this particular concept of reconciliation which checks whenever something changes in React land. So the virtual DOM tree gets reconstructed, and then React matches the content of DOM and virtual DOM, and then checks like how it can efficiently change the browser DOM so that it can exactly represent your virtual DOM. And virtual DOM contains this sort of tree-like structure. Okay, so now you know a little bit of theory of what JSX is. So let's head back to this thing. Okay, so we have replaced this with our component. This is the functional component, and this functional component is outputting this particular thing. Now in case you are wondering like what exactly gets output, so you can use Babel online editor to check the equivalent of what gets transpiled, okay, or what is the result of transpilation. So I'm going to
copy this code and I'm going to head over to babel.js.io and I'm going to copy this, paste this. Okay, so this is the thing which is going to be output after transpilation. So you created this and React resulted into this particular thing. So create React.create element, as we have talked about. Div is the tag, so div is the DOM container or the element, right? So you can also use other elements as well. So I can use something like this as well. So oops, hello. Okay, and okay, so a React component can contain other React component that can be functional component or the class-based component. Okay, and I'm going to provide name and that will be Rajat. Okay, now you can see that it is going to build a component in this particular way, and this component is again containing the child component. And React is going to build a tree like this. First it is going to discover this, then it will go to the definition of hello, and then it is going to collect this particular thing, and then it is going to club everything together, and then it will get the tree, and that tree gets rendered to the browser or to the mobile interfaces. Okay, so now we know that how to write our components, but still we are lacking something. We haven't write our class-based component. Okay, let's build a counter. Okay, extends react.component. Okay, so it has to extend this particular component class. Okay, now as we have talked about that React classes or the class-based component can contain internal states. Okay, so I'm going to call the super because this is a necessity so that your class or your component is initialized properly. Okay, then I'm going to create a state, and state will contain count, and that count is initialized to 0. Okay, and then the render function. Now render is the method which needs to be present in your class component because it is equivalent to returning this thing. So in functional component you don't use render method, but if you are creating a class-based component you need to have this particular render method because this is what gets called when you try to call that class-based component into your application, right? So React calls render to know like what sort of tree it should build, right? So if I'm going to use this particular counter name here in place of hello, so React will look into the render method of this counter in order to know what sort of DOM it should build, right? Or what sort of tree it should build, right? Okay, so let's return what we should, like div and output state and then count. Okay, and so we have used this internal property. Okay, the state. Okay, inc. Okay, and this dot set state. Set state is a function which is specific to React and which you can use to change this particular internal property of your component, right? So whenever you are going to call set state, React is going to tear down the particular tree it has built inside its memory, right? And then it is going to reconstruct that particular tree based on your new state. Okay, so that is how React actually knows like what to show on the UI. Okay, so set state, this dot, not dot but count equals to this dot state dot count plus 1. Okay, so we are going, and we need to create two buttons, one to increment and one to decrement. Okay, so see, we, okay, and this one, not class but on click. Now in React, since this is not HTML, we are using JSX. So JSX actually uses camel case syntax in order to specify the attributes. So in HTML we use on click, which is all small letters. Now in React we use, or in JSX we use camel casing. So this will be on click and the C will be capitalized. On click and this dot inc. Okay, similarly we are going to write another function, this dot dec. Okay, which is going to decrement. Copy this and paste this. Okay, and then we are going to decrement it. All right, so that will be DC. Let me see, like it is reporting some error, adjacent DSX. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it, because there can be only one container element. So I'm going to wrap this thing up inside one div, control X. All right, now okay, control V. So now our component is nicely wrapped inside one div. Okay, now instead of this hello, I am going to render our class based component, which is having its own internal state. Okay, so I'm going to paste this counter here and okay, so and save this, let it render. Oops, I use this braces, it should not be there. And now you can see that our counter has rendered. Now let's try to press these buttons, but as you can see these buttons are not working. Now what is the reason for that? In React we have to bind our class functions properly. So we use this particular syntax, inc, this dot inc dot bind this. Okay, so this will bind your particular inc with your component when it is initialized. Okay, so we are going to do the same for DC as well. All right, save this and let's try to do this now. Okay, now our component is working fine. Okay, so as you can see that now I can increment or decrement based on whatever I want to do. Now I can create several copies of this particular component. Now let's suppose I create yet another functional component like counter container, right? And it can get like what, anything like I can return several copies of container or counters, right? That div, because again we have to wrap everything nicely inside one container, right? So we are going to create a div and let's counter and paste, create many counters. Okay, we have created 3 counters and now we can use this particular thing here. Okay, save it. Okay, so now we have got 3 counters and I can control all of these counters individually, right? So I can build some sort of cart based applications using this sort of counters, right? So this is how you build functional and class based component. Okay, now let's suppose I want to initialize our counter with some particular value. How would I do that? So it is very easy. We are going to use props because in our class-based component we are not using props as of now. So we will exploit props to initialize our value. Now let's suppose I want to initialize this particular second counter with value 2, and then it can follow its own way of incrementing and decrementing, but it should start from 2, right? So let me pass a component like start, and that I'm going to pass the value 2. Okay, so that will be 2. Okay, not this 2 but this 2. Okay, I'm going to pass it a value, and this is how you represent values in JSX. So in case you want to pass a boolean value, that will be passed in this particular way. Okay, so I'm going to pass the value 2. Okay, so this will be the prop and it will be accessed in our class-based components using this .props.start. Okay, so we have passed our start props as an attribute to this particular React component, and now we are going to use props. So we are going to initialize our component properly, so we have to pass this prop property to the super constructor. Okay, and after that we are going to use this dot props and start. If it is defined, then it is going to use that value or use 0 as the initial value. Okay, and save this particular thing, and as you can see that our counter 2 has initialized with the value 2. Now I can decrement it or increment it. So that is how you pass external props to your component in class-based component. So with that we have reached to the conclusions of basics of React.js. So we have learned about functional component, class-based component, how to build component, how to mix and match component, how to create component which contain other functional and class-based components. So this is the end of this particular video. In my next video, I'm going to teach you how you can build a simple calculator, right? This particular thing, I will teach you how to build this sort of calculator plus 9. Okay, so it is not a very fancy calculator, but it will build upon all of the concepts we have learned in this particular tutorial. Now in that tutorial we will talk more about passing props and managing states and smart and dumb components, what kind of organizations you can do for managing your component, right? So we will talk about all of those issues in my next video. So I just hope that you have learned the basics of React in this particular series, and with that, this is your guy Rajat Saxena signing off. In case you have some query, do write to me or hit me up on Twitter at Rajat1Saxena, or my email ID is rajat@rainstudios.com. Okay, take care, bye bye, and I will see you in the next video, and don't forget to subscribe.